Hello! Ever since I mentioned that I had been designing a raid on the old podcast a while back, you guys have really wanted to see anything and everything regarding it. So, as promised, I think it's finally in a state where I can show you some of the stuff. I'm not completely done with the entire thing yet. As a small preface, this project has no relation to any official Bungie content. This is just something I did in my spare time because I thought it would be fun to design some raid encounters. Do not expect to see any of this in the game at any point. Also, the concept art you will see in the video was done by Jake Myler, Andie Ayotte, and Derek Barnes. I'll put their contact info in the description in case you wanted to commission some stuff for yourself. Alright, so when I was designing this, the main thing I wanted to try and accommodate was groups of varying sizes. One of the more depressing things in the game is that people have difficulty getting into the traditional 6-man groups for a raid. So with that in mind, I designed the encounters to be modular, in the sense that they can be completed by a group size from 3 to 6 players. So you could start the raid with a 3-man group, but then one of your friends logs on and you could increase the group size to 4. Doing so would scale the content to accommodate the extra person, so on and so forth until maybe you had the entire group filled. The mechanics of the fight will largely stay the same, but there will be more enemies, maybe at some point they'll get more aggressive or have shields. I haven't really figured out the exact specific because, well, at some point you just have to actually see how something plays in the game. The system is one of those things where you would have to extensively test this with all group sizes to see if it's even worth doing. Alright, now on to the story and main themes. The activity takes place in what the Vanguard believed to be one of the beating hearts of Mercury. The Vex turned this planet into a machine world a long time ago, and this location is crucial in keeping the machine running. When the Guardians arrive, though, they quickly learn that this place is something much sinister. Every encounter is based on the Vex learning how Guardians behave when given a choice. Would they rather hurt themselves to quickly complete a goal? Could they sacrifice one of their own to continue further in an encounter? There are old fights in World of Warcraft that would touch on this, and I thought it could be interesting to expand on that. In the overarching story, I would have the Vex needing more data on how the Guardians behave since they're always unpredictable. The Guardians' humanity and light is simply always one step beyond the cold, hard logic that the Vex operate on. For the first encounter, the Guardians arrive at the Vex Shrine on the surface of Mercury. They're presented with 3 separate passageways. Entering any one of them will start the encounter. At the end of these tunnels, there are sync plates that must be activated by standing on them. I know, starting out with some real visionary stuff here, Pat. Opposite of the 3 passageways, there are 3 pillars. Once the corresponding sync plates have been activated, beams of light will shoot out of these pillars. These beams of light are the main raid mechanic. I'm calling it light refraction. Guardians can change the path of the beams by focusing their own light and interrupting the beam itself. This mechanic will slowly deal damage to the player over time and will be featured during key points of every single fight. Since the Guardians are standing on the sync plate in the middle of the tunnel, they will be hit by this beam of light and get quickly introduced to the light infraction mechanic. Players will have to reflect the light back out of the tunnel where the beams are originating. Players will have to put about 3 health bars worth into the light targets. During this time, there will be various Vex spawning in to cause issues. On the 3-player difficulty, there won't be many spawning, and it will mostly be simple mobs like goblins and harpies. If you have a full 6-man though, then the enemies will be more difficult and could feature some minotaurs. Players will have to divide their time between channeling the light and taking care of the Vex. Once all 3 points have been destroyed with the light infraction ability, the central area will open up, allowing the Guardians to enter into the raid. The thrill of exploring into the raid further should be all the motivation the player needs to go into the newly formed door, but I figured it would be a good time to actually introduce them into the big bad guy that they will eventually kill later on. As the players are making their way into the raid, a colossal minotaur will spawn into the area where players were previously fighting. This dude is straight up unkillable right now, and will quickly stomp any Guardian left outside on the surface. That will probably encourage Guardians to get further down into the raid. The players will then make their way down a long tunnel and then drop down into a giant antechamber. This will be the staging area for the remaining encounters and the final boss fight. There are doors on the edges of the room that will lead to other encounters and can be accessed from a series of light bridges on the upper ring. At the floor of the antechamber, there are man cannons that will launch players back up into the upper ring. This serves as a practice area for later since there will be a fight here. Since this is a giant circular area, the players will be able to choose which encounter they go into first. I want there to be a total of 3 encounters that the players can choose from, but I've only designed 2 of those as of now. All of the concept art features 3 doors because that's the magical number of video games. One of the encounters players can choose is titled the Shields Encounter. The original idea was to have some modifiers activate at the end of every single fight to make the rest of the raid more difficult. At the end of every fight there would be a message like, Vex Name Dude passes on the information gathered to the other Vex. This fight itself would activate the match game and fresh troops once you completed it, but over time I realized that those modifiers aren't actually interesting, so I took out that modifier idea. The Shield's name stuck around though because I couldn't think of anything else. Anyway, Guardians will enter into the room to find a large structure with tons of wires and stuff going into it. This will be the Vex being that will analyze the Guardians. I kinda named it the Oculus. The main mechanic that signals damage phases in the fight is called Analyzing Light. The Vex Oculus thing will pick up Guardians at random and place a debuff on them that freezes them in place, and place a small orb of light above their heads. Players will have to make use of the beams of light scattered about the room and use the light refraction mechanic to destroy the orb floating above their teammate's head. This can't be done immediately though. Whoever is being analyzed must also deal damage to one of the giant wires surrounding the Oculus. This will allow players to make some interesting choices. They have to get into a sort of balancing act where they allow the player enough time to deal damage to the Oculus, but not so long that the debuff runs out. The player being analyzed will be able to see how long they have until the debuff runs out by looking at the debuff on the screen. Other players will be able to tell as well since the orb above the Guardians will be slowly descending. Once it touches the Guardian, the debuff has run out. If the orb is destroyed, a simple named hobgoblin will spawn. If the debuff is allowed to run its full duration, then a Minotaur with a shield matching the Analyzed Guardian subclass will spawn. This Minotaur will have a lot of health, and will not be able to be CC'd by blinding grenades or tether. It's meant to punish players for letting the debuff run its full course. Also, lore-wise, it could be explained that the Vex fully analyzed the Guardian's light, so they were able to pass that information onto this particular Minotaur and allow it to royally screw stuff up for the Guardians. During the encounter, supplicants will spawn out from underneath the Oculus. I chose that enemy type because in my head, I don't want the players to actually make a fort with defender bubbles. They should need some encouragement to move around the arena space. As far as how many players get analyzed, I figured if there were 3 to 4 players, only 1 would get analyzed. If you went up to 5 to 6 though, then 2 at a time would be analyzed. This allows for enough players to both defend the Guardian that can't move, as well as have someone waiting to use the light refraction thing to destroy the debuff orb. So the fight will essentially involve the players defending themselves in the play space and coordinating damage time on the Oculus. The goal of this fight, and all of the remaining ones, is to have players dictate the pace of the fight themselves to a degree, instead of having the fights having extremely defined phases. Think the Templar fight versus the Atheon fight in Vault of Glass. Players can kind of dictate their own pace and figure out when they want to damage the boss while managing the oracles. Atheon is a very structured fight in comparison. Alright, now on to the next fight. I call this one the Abilities fight because it was originally going to involve messing with the recharge times of abilities and supers. That might have been interesting at one point in time, but again it felt like it was something to artificially inflate the difficulty of the actual encounter. Only one of the original mechanics actually made it through to this stage of the design, so I felt like the name still kind of stands true to what happens. The fight has a lot going on with it, so it'll probably be easier just to list off the separate mechanics. First off, the room is a large circle with a central raised area. The main thing players will be damaging are memory access nodes. These are located around the arena at the bottom of shielded off holes. Think the holes in the Crota's End raid, but with shields over them, allowing players to not fall down them. The shields over these access points cannot be damaged or destroyed by players. The only way to destroy them is by having a special named mob killed near them. During the fight, overcharged goblins will spawn and run at the players similar to the Vex mobs in the Vault of Glass. Once that mob is killed, it will leave an electrified field on the ground in a small radius. If done correctly, that will damage the shield over the memory access point. Once the shield has been removed, the node will be raised up onto the floor, allowing players to damage it. Now, all that sounds rather simple. The other main mechanic of the fight will cause one member of the team to be teleported to the center of the room on the raised platform. An orb will form around that player from their feet. If the orb is allowed to fully form, then the player will get a debuff that begins draining their super energy. If the orb is allowed to stay long after that, then the player will be killed. The only way to destroy this orb is to have one of the raid members use light refraction from one of the sources around the room. If the orb is destroyed before the player is killed, then they will be released and can go back into the fight. However, they will still have the debuff on them that drains super energy. If the infected player stands close to any teammates, then the debuff will automatically spread. The debuff will not last forever, since that would be really dumb and not fun, but it'll last long enough that players will have to be mindful of their positioning. So, the way I envisioned a typical encounter of this to go down would have all the players kind of scattered about the room. A random player gets teleported, and some of the players respawn by moving towards the light refraction beams. During this time, the goblins would also spawn and need to be killed near a shielded memory access point. If timed right, the team will be able to damage the node that comes up from the floor and already have the player being analyzed freed. During this whole time, there will be various Vex spawning around the arena as well, so players will have something to kill in between damage phases. Once all of the memory access nodes have been destroyed, the fight will end. I figured the number of access points will change based on how many people are in the encounter. 3 players equals 3 nodes, 4 equals 4, etc., etc. The final fight is against that colossal minotaur. I imagine after having an entire raid of shooting inanimate computer parts, it would be a welcome sight to fight against something somewhat living. The final fight will take place in the antechamber after every encounter in the surrounding rooms has been completed. After the players return to the antechamber from each encounter, the light bridge leading to that doorway will disappear. Once all encounters are completed and everyone is at the antechamber for the final time, there will be no way to access the outer rooms, as the light bridges leading to them will disappear. The only thing remaining will be the outer light ring, as well as multiple sources for light refraction. Lore-wise, I'm going to say that the Vex planned on the Guardians not making it this far, and having the Colossal Minotaur teleport in as a last-ditch effort to make sure the Guardians don't get word out about this facility. The test subjects living wasn't part of their plan. So the fight against the Minotaur will take place on 2 levels. The upper ring will kind of be the safe space, and lower area will be where a lot of the action happens. When the Minotaur spawns in, he will gain aggro on one Guardian. He will attempt to smash that Guardian off the upper area in large sweeping motions. Since there really isn't much defense up there, the Guardians need to run down below to keep the Minotaur's attention, and stop him from squashing other players on the upper ring. The player that has aggro on the Minotaur will have to run around down below and kite the Minotaur around the arena. During this time, players in the upper ring can shoot at the legs of the Minotaur to slow him down some. After enough damage has been done to its legs, the Minotaur will kneel down and enter a self-repair phase. The players must outdamage its self-healing with large amounts of damage via themselves or the light refraction. There's one small mechanic added to the light refraction ability. Using one of them will remove part of the light circle at the top of the antechamber. Players will not be required to use them if their damage is high enough, but they will generally want to, since the damage from one light refraction channel is more than enough to counteract the self-healing done by the Minotaur. During the fight, there will be mobs spawning on the lower level as well, making it difficult for the person keeping aggro on the Minotaur to move around. This is really all the fight entails. Players will randomly be assigned aggro, have to go run down below, and players above will have to kill mobs while deciding when to move into damage phases. Players down below can use one of the man cannons to get back up to the top circle. After every self-repair though, the movement speed of the Minotaur will be increased. At some point the Minotaur will be moving too quickly to outrun, or the group will be out of light refractions to use on the damage phase. The only problem I really see with this encounter is that players might run out of ammo if they're standing on top of the ring. Haven't really figured that part out yet, but whatever. And that's it. That's all I've designed for the raid so far. I want there to be one more encounter in there, but inspiration is sporadic for this. It took a little bit over 6 months to come up with all these encounters and refine them without ever actually playing them. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. And one last time, I want to thank Jake Myler, Andie Ayotte, and Derek Barnes for helping me out with this concept art. Their work really helped shape how these encounters go down, and you guys should totally follow them on Twitter. I want to thank all of you for watching, and I'll see you next time.